The road to Damascus didn't look much like this one, but the same God who met Saul on the road to Damascus is right here, just as the same God is right where you are. And the road to Damascus didn't look anything like this, I don't suppose, but God is still here and still talking to people. And the road to Damascus didn't look anything much like this one either, but the same God who met Paul on the road to Damascus is here, right where we are, wherever we are, whatever place on life's journey we may have reached. So wherever you are on life's journey, and whatever your road looks like, whatever your experience is, and each person's is different, God is interrupting you. God is intruding, if I can put it that way. And this is the first in a Lent series called The Jesus Way. And it's about discovering Jesus in the first place. And it's something that's been going on in you for a long time, and possibly longer than you know. What I just want to share is wherever your journey has reached so far, let's pause a moment in the road and let me encourage you to think about how God has disclosed God's self to you, God's love to you, God's compassion and grace and mercy to you, God's interest in you personally, and how God has disclosed that to you through Jesus. And this message is really about that, but it includes a pygmy sperm whale, but more on that later. So welcome, thank you for joining us in this message about the initial discovery of Jesus in our lives, which is really about our initial awareness. Since none of us ever discovers God, it's not actually possible to discover God. Discovery is the result of a research process, and you can only discover the discoverable. And since God is the creator of the universe and therefore outside of the universe and outside of its physics and stuff like that, God is not discoverable by a process of research. Rather, we discover God because God reveals God's self to us, and God is constantly doing that in all kinds of different ways, general ways for all of us, but also personal ways for each of us. Three characters are in our readings this morning, and each has a very, very different story to tell. On the road, we have Saul, a person who believes that they're so right, that their way of seeing things should be imposed upon others, that you can invade their space and their homes, and you can lock them up if they don't agree with your agenda. You can do worse, you can have them executed. Saul was involved in that previously. You can just try and impose your version of how the world should be upon other people by force. I think you know what I'm probably referring to right now, but we see it in the world around us. Saul, unfortunately, that's the road he was on. Not a pretty road at all. But God unseated him from his horse, so to speak, thrown to the ground. God invaded with a bright light that dark and dismal and oppressive road, and turned Saul from an oppressor of the way of Jesus to a great revealer of the way of Jesus, who would spend the rest of his life trying to introduce people to an experience of God in Christ. So we've got that character having his initial experience, but of course God's Spirit had been at work in Saul before that, because that's what the voice of Jesus in his experience says to him. You're kicking against the goads, aren't you? It's not going very well, is it? You know there's something in you that's not okay with this, isn't there? And yet you persist in trying to fence me out, and the day has come for you to change, Saul. So some people have very dramatic turnaround experiences like that. Most of us don't. Now, then there's the other two characters. There's this woman who believes herself, because her culture and those around her have helped her learn this, believes herself to be beyond the pale, to be totally unacceptable. And something, we don't know what it is, we're not told, something in the ministry of Jesus, something he said while he was teaching in public, or maybe something he said to her personally, who knows, or something she saw him do with other people, or something he helped her with, or we don't know what the breakthrough was, but through Jesus, God had the breakthrough to this woman, and she allowed herself to come to God and to experience this huge acceptance through forgiveness that God had waiting for her. Now she's overwhelmed with emotion and cries her tears of joy, of acceptance, of emotional release, of freedom over the feet of Jesus, through whom she's come into that liberation. It's a wonderful, wonderful picture, looking on and disapproving. Another Pharisee. Saul was a Pharisee, so is Simon. But Simon's a bit of a researcher. He's not like Saul. He's got a certain openness of mind. He's exploring and investigating Jesus. He's heard about Jesus, perhaps watched him preach, perhaps listened to his message, and has invited him for a meal. He wants to suss out Jesus a bit better. And when this woman comes in, Simon feels he's got his answer. Jesus is a fraud. Because if Jesus really were God's messenger, Jesus would discern what is going on in her head and her heart. So there's a little joke built in to the event, God joke, in which Jesus looks at Simon and says, let me tell you what's going on in your head and your heart, because it's a lot further away from God than hers is. And he tells this little parable of people owing a debt which they are forgiven. And one of them knows that their debt is huge. The other thinks of their debt as small. And Simon is asked to answer Jesus' question, who will love the forgiver the most? And Simon says, well, the person who's been forgiven the biggest amount. And Jesus says, there she is. And there you are. What are you going to do about it, Simon? Would you like to catch her up? Would you like to join in the party that she's reached? Would you like to be the welcomed home younger brother, or are you going to be the stuffy older brother who looks on disapprovingly and refuses to go into the party? Which is it, Simon? And we never know. In all our journeys of life, whichever kind of road you're on, God is always there and always revealing something to you. And chiefly and particularly, this is made the truth in Jesus. So the roads are all different. We all have different roads. We all reach different points along our individual journeys. But God has something to say to us. Jesus has something to say to us that it is utterly life-changing. So Saul changes his life completely. The woman changed her life completely. And Simon is left like a question to nag at us and say, what about me? Did he change, or did he not change? Do I change, or do I sort of carry on much as before? I sense that God might be at work in things in my life. Well, last year I saw a pygmy sperm whale. At least I'm pretty sure I did, but to be honest, there's a nagging doubt. Because it turns out that there's not only a pygmy sperm whale, I'd never heard of it, there's another one called a dwarf sperm whale. And no surprise, I guess, they're really hard to tell apart. Both are hardly ever seen alive. And therefore, if you do see one, there's relatively little experience in the experts to help you decide whether it was a pygmy sperm whale or a dwarf sperm whale that you saw. And I wanted to know.
But so what did I do? Well, I went straight away as soon as I could to some books that help because they are written by people who've had experience of identifying whales and feel they can help you identify it. So that's what I did. You might do the same. I can do that with my question about have I had an experience of God or not. I can go to a book and it will tell me about the Jesus person, and I can go, oh yeah, that, though very different, nonetheless matches, resonates with what I think I've experienced. Looks like it might be real. Because you see, with my experience of the pygmy sperm whale, it was such a surprise to me, so different from anything I've ever experienced. I found myself doubting I'd seen anything at all. But I got out my notes and they matched what was in the book. So I went to another book and it matches. And so then I talked to people online and I consulted the experts. And it turns out, yeah, you're going to have to be a little bit doubtful here, but chances are what you think you saw is what you saw. And so I have a Bible, I can go to that and check out the Jesus thing. I've got other people I can go to, I can listen to their stories and I can see what they've learned and what they've experienced, and we can swap our tales of encounters with God. And that can allow us to reach a confidence in our own experience, a reasoned and reasonable confidence in our own experience to say, well, it wasn't like what I thought meeting God would be like. I thought it would be more like the Damascus Road, but actually this was more like Simon sort of wavering around, wandering, trying to look at things or whatever. Or it was like something else. Who knows? Each of us is on a different road. But that's my perception. And I've tried to check it out by looking at the experiences of Jesus in the reference book and by talking to other people who've got something to help me find my way. So I just want to share with us during Lent the way of Jesus, the Jesus way, and to say it starts with a starting point. Along life's journey, God will be interrupting you. Maybe not as dramatically as he interrupted Paul. Maybe not as dramatically as he interrupted that woman. Maybe a bit more like Simon, but maybe you're not even interested enough to investigate. I wasn't. When God interrupted my life, I put the whole subject away for more than 18 months, thinking, I don't even believe in God. Whatever just happened, it can't have been God. It just felt like it at the time, but that's clearly nonsense. But eventually, I met people whose experience made me think, wait a minute, that's a bit like mine. And then I checked it out in a reference book and I said, the whole thing begins to add up together. I think I know what just happened. And it changed my life. So there's an initial setting out to follow Jesus, but actually discovering Jesus is everything that happens thereafter. Well, I wish I had time to link some of these things to some of the parables of Jesus and some of the other stuff. We'll be doing a little bit of that in our church time if you join us. But otherwise, God bless you. Thank you for listening to this message.